Hello, dear friends. I hope you all are doing great. In the previous century, people had shorter life expectancies than they do now. It was also harder to get good medical care. If you could overcome those obstacles, though, you might live long enough to experience something called a midlife crisis. Now, what is a midlife crisis? It's when you buy a red sports car with lots of horsepower, start dating much younger people, and generally do a lot of impulsive things. You know, the usual stuff. Researchers have been investigating whether the midlife crisis is real or imagined. Is this a biological crisis that everyone goes through at a certain age? Or does it only happen to some people? Or is it just a myth that became popular because the term sounds interesting? Let's look at what science has to say about it. Erik Erikson's Stages of Psychological Development. Before we dive into research on the midlife crisis, let's talk about Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. Erikson was a developmental psychologist who proposed that humans go through 8 stages of development from birth to old age. Each stage has a unique crisis that must be resolved in order to move on to the next stage. The first 6 stages are trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt, industry versus inferiority, identity versus role confusion, and intimacy versus isolation. These stages basically describe the major developmental tasks of childhood and adolescence. The 7th stage is generativity versus stagnation. This stage typically occurs during adulthood, usually between the ages of 40 and 65. According to Erikson, people in this stage want to give back to society in some way. They may raise a family, make significant contributions to their communities, or help to solve important problems. Stagnation happens when people fail to find ways to contribute to the world around them. They become self-centered and focus too much on their own needs and wants. So according to Erikson, the midlife crisis is basically a period of introspection where you evaluate how well you've lived your life so far. This is a good time to consider whether you need to change anything about the way you're living so you can feel more fulfilled. So based on his theory, having a midlife crisis is not necessarily a bad thing. It simply means that you're at a point in your life where you should be thinking about what legacy you want to leave behind. Nicolas Cage's Strange Purchases. One way to figure out if you're having a midlife crisis is by looking at what you spend your money on. One famous person who experienced an intense midlife crisis was actor Nicolas Cage. Cage was born in 1964 and became famous in the 1980s. He continued to rise in popularity throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. Many of his films were huge hits, including Con Air, Ghost Rider, National Treasure, and Lord of War. At his peak, he was making $40 million per movie. It's safe to say that Nicolas Cage is a very talented actor, and it's likely that he would continue to star in blockbuster films for many years. But starting in 2006, Cage began to lose interest in acting. Between 2006 and 2011, he starred in several films that received terrible reviews. In addition to being a failure at the box office, these films damaged Cage's reputation as a bankable movie star. By 2011, it seemed like his career was over. Around this time, Cage began spending large amounts of money on bizarre items. He bought a $67 million T-Rex dinosaur skull. He paid $300,000 for a haunted house. He purchased a medieval castle in England for $8 million. And he even bought 2 golden mummies from Egypt for $1.8 million. Clearly, Cage was going through some sort of existential crisis. All of these purchases seem strange and pointless. They don't really fit together in any kind of logical way. But Cage didn't stop there. In 2006, he purchased a private jet for $5 million. But after buying the jet, he realized that he wasn't really interested in flying it. He never even got a pilot's license. Cage also bought 7 rare muscle cars, but didn't know how to drive stick shift. He apparently planned on converting them to automatics. Obviously, none of these purchases made much sense. But what led Cage to spend so much money on random things? Well, it's impossible to know for sure. But one possibility is that he was experiencing the effects of a midlife crisis. How modernity invented the midlife crisis. Some researchers argue that the midlife crisis is not a real phenomenon at all. It's a product of modern culture. Researchers Mark Seltzer and Philip A. Brickman conducted a study in 1985 to determine whether people actually experience a midlife crisis. They interviewed 160 adults who were between the ages of 30 and 75. The participants were asked to rate statements using 9-point scales. Here are some of the statements they used. I am at the age where men have a midlife crisis. I am happy with my marriage. I wish I could turn back the clock and relive my life. Overall, the results showed that there was no consistent midlife crisis. Sure, there were some reports of marital dissatisfaction and unhappiness with life. But these issues didn't only affect middle-aged people. The researchers concluded that the idea of a midlife crisis is largely a myth. However, they admitted that some people do experience significant psychological distress during middle age. But this is true for people of all ages. Seltzer and Brickman suggested that the midlife crisis is probably a product of modernity. We tend to think of our past selves as better because we associate youth with freedom, independence, and opportunity. On the other hand, we tend to view our future selves with pessimism because we associate old age with illness, frailty, and death. In modern societies, we live longer than ever before, so we have more time to reflect on the past and worry about the future. This leads us to glorify our youth and regret getting older. It also leads us to fear entering old age. So as we approach our senior years, we try to recapture the excitement and enthusiasm of our youth. This is what causes the midlife crisis. Other researchers agree with this general assessment. They found that the midlife crisis is a phenomenon of Western middle-class men. Non-Western men don't report similar feelings of dissatisfaction, and the midlife crisis isn't limited to men. The Amazing Midlife Crisis. Author Ida Locan wrote a book titled The Amazing Midlife Crisis. She defines the midlife crisis as a period of reassessment and change that some people go through during middle age. According to her research, only about 1/3 of people experience the midlife crisis. For most of human history, people couldn't live long enough to reach middle age. But now that we have conquered diseases and increased the average life expectancy, we have more access to the midlife crisis. When people hit middle age, they realize that they have less time left in their lives than they have already wasted. This causes them to panic and seek out new experiences. Lachlan writes that this usually manifests as a desire for excitement. People begin to take risks that they wouldn't normally take. They might divorce their spouse or quit their job. They might impulsively buy a motorcycle or move to another country. The happiness curve. Now let's look at some recent research on the midlife crisis. Researchers at the University of California, Riverside recently published a paper titled, When Does Life Get Better? Midlife U-Turns and the Pursuit of Happiness. The authors of the study looked at a large sample of Americans. They wanted to see whether there was a relationship between age and happiness. The researchers discovered that there is a U-shaped relationship between age and happiness. Basically, the younger and middle-aged people tend to be happier than their teenage and elderly counterparts. Interestingly, the researchers also found that people who reached the age of 80 or above reported feeling just as happy as young adults. So it seems that the midlife crisis does exist. People experience their greatest amount of unhappiness around the age of 50. But after this point, happiness increases until you reach around 80 years old. Then it increases again in your final years. The researchers believe that this is due to a variety of factors. For one, Young people tend to be optimistic about the future. They're excited about what lies ahead and all of the opportunities that await them. On the other hand, people nearing the end of their lives tend to be satisfied with the way they've lived. They've accomplished most of their goals and they're able to look back on a long and fulfilling life. In contrast, middle-aged people have a lot of responsibilities and obligations. They often have kids to take care of and aging parents to look after. Their careers are also demanding and there's always more work to do. All of these responsibilities cause a lot of stress, and that negatively affects happiness. Of course, not everyone experiences a midlife crisis. Those who do have a midlife crisis tend to be middle-class men. They're educated, well-off financially, and have access to lots of information. This makes them aware of all of the things they haven't done yet, and it makes them regret the time they've already wasted. Do you think the midlife crisis is real? Why or why not? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this.